calling off justice mean inequity. So who go say the truth? Who go say the truth? Christian cancer, silence. Islamic leaders, silence. Kings and queens, silence. Traditional leaders, silence. So who go say the truth? We are the workers of composite call. Now by area, why no better? We are the workers of composite call. One guy's out here, why no better? Who go say the truth? Who go say the truth? Oh, he need it now, see what I see so. Now your friend on a night come at them. Only papi obeka na sembia. So I want to bet you everybody was afraid. And until I learned to my quantity again, once my boy dumping one and I cheat. But who go tell the truth? Nanai or say me. Nanso bien person beka wasam because everybody is afraid. Anya safwe muayini. Aku drop on yina dalima. And see who go say the truth? Obiaja konson so to cross your man sa to me bia kakobrafo. Efo anyina ye. Efo when you know yet. Na so kutrata down na so be dia back or why no keke. I fene for be man mo pia for efo ne cross on my mo. Hanya safwe mo ayini. Akuku trofo nyina dalima. And who go say the truth? Abaya di bote chino. Yedi bi bebo nyande bi. Kachisa would your mouth pipinuma. Would your mind never shine my frafonsa? But who go tell the truth? TUC, silence. Even journalists, silence. Oh, then who go say the truth? Right is right. Wrong is wrong, no matter how you justify. You say you wanna get rid of corruption. Someone want to help you, now the person become your target. Jobless no they mean senseless. Poverty no they mean useless. One day them go resist.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to yet another edition of MyView Show here live on TodayGhanaNews TV, where every Monday evening we bring you the best and most topical socio and political talk show in Ghana, in Africa, and globally. And this evening, is no different. For some time now, we have been making the case that this year is going to be quite political. And that is so because this year marks an election year in Ghana. And our mission on this show is to ensure that we give our viewers and listeners all the necessary information that they need so that come December 7th, when they go to cast their votes, they do so based on information and not based on trivialities. And that is our mission for the show for this year. And this evening is no different. Well, I just said that come December 7th, there is going to be an elections. And as you may know in Ghana, this is the period that we have come to know as the cuckoo season of politicians. And this is the time where they would go to every nook and cranny of the country, every corner. As long as there are votes to be won, they will be there. And this also means that no subject is a no-go area. They will touch and politicize and campaign on every subject, including education. Now, this has become much more pronounced probably since probably around the year 2016. But has it always never been the case? Isn't it the case that education and politics have always been intertwined in modern day Ghanaian history or in modern day Ghana? Well, let's take a very short narrative of education in Ghana so that we can build the context to this discussion. That is because most of our discussion this evening will take place after the Fourth Republic. So let's go down memory lane and talk about education, Western education and Ghana. Now, you see, before the introduction of Western education in Ghana, we as Africans and Ghanaians also had our form of education. But education as we know it, and Western education in its current form, was introduced in Ghana at the coast where the Europeans were based. Started with castle schools, and these schools were mostly meant for the offspring of Europeans and Africans, those who are generally known as mulattoes or mixed race. Now, as time went on, the people who were educated in these schools became very productive or very necessary for the conduct of business as they became liaison officers and aided trade between the Europeans and the people of the Gold Coast. And as colonization got entrenched, they became much more important because they got to provide some administrative services for the colonial government. As such, some chiefs and prominent Ghanaians also started advocating for education for their children. And that is where we started from. And that is how the colonial government also got into the business of education. And ever since Ghana gained independence, the first president of Ghana, Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, sought to use education, well, they say to democratize education and to send education to as many people as possible. Now, in between the overthrow of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the Fourth Republic, we have dilly-dallied with this concept of education. About 3 or 4 commissions of inquiries, or not inquiries, but commissions have been set up to try and investigate education, and their proposals have always centered between giving Ghanaians quality education or expanding it to as many people as politics. So you see, from this short narrative, you would see that education is not alien to politics, and politics is not alien to education. So as we go into these elections, education has become one of the topical issues. So this evening, our topic for today is to look at education and politics in Ghana, and to look at the good and the bad sides of this topical issue. And as we usually see in this on this show, we only can ask the questions, but we normally do not have the answers. But what we can do is to bring people who have the answers to help us, to help you, our viewers and listeners, to have a better understanding of the topic. And so that is why this evening we are joined by Dr. Maxwell Akansina Azieba. Dr. Azieba is a senior lecturer at the SD Dombo University of Business and Integrated Development Studies in Wa, Ghana. He is a specialist in education, and he has experience in education not only in Ghana, but in other parts of the globe. So this evening, our mission is to tap into his head, to get his expertise and his experience, so that we can discuss this interesting topic of this interlinkage between politics and education in Ghana. Welcome to the show, Dr. Azieba.
Thank you, Albert. Good evening, and good evening to your listeners and followers.
Thank you very much for joining us, and saying thank you to you. Let's also say a welcome to our listeners and viewers as well. And so we say a very warm welcome to our listeners on Sakina Information Center in Tatali in Northern Ghana. We also say a very warm welcome to our listeners on High FM 93.7 in Achuhima in the Eastern region, just as we say a warm welcome to our listeners on the King's Radio in Accra, and also a warm welcome to all our viewers and listeners on all social media platforms, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram, and on all your favorite social media networks. If you are joining us, this is MyView Show here live on TodayGhanaNews TV, and we warmly welcome you to today's show. Yes, so back to our guest for today. Dr. Azieba, how are you doing?
Albert, I'm doing fine, but not devoid of the common problems, the troubles every Ghanaian goes through. So I'm doing well.
Well, that's interesting, because this issue of the problems that every Ghanaian goes through, it seems like a hot potato. Everybody seems to be passing it around. When we talk to the politicians, they try to pass it on. They say, no, as for us, we are struggling. We are with the masses. And of course, the masses say they are struggling. And they say that probably the academia, they are in the Eiffel Tower. They are fine. And everybody seems to be passing the hot potato around. I don't want to believe that all Ghanaians are in the same pot together. So probably your case is better.
Well, the politicians go seeking votes, and so they have an obligation to answer some of those specific questions. And if they fail to, we can take them on. If they say they are not fine, and we see it otherwise in the way they live, we can take them on. For me, if I tell you I'm not fine, of course, I'm not saying anything that is untrue, but how are you going to take me on? Because that's the difference between us. So they have their, when I get in there, eventually, maybe one day, fine, you can take me on that leg. But for now, I'm going through the heat.
Okay, going through the heat and taking you on. Yeah, so we can take you on other things, but what we can take you on is on your area of expertise, which is the education space. Apart from the fact that you are also in the education space, and that this is your area of expertise, you have also gained experience in education in other parts of the world. If you look at your expertise and you measure that against your experience of the education sector in other parts of the world, in the West, what would be your assessment of the education system in Ghana currently?
Thanks very much, Albert, once again. Yes, it's true. I'm fortunate to have had a feel of the education back home and then away in Germany, also partly in the US and in South Africa. So, yes, I can see different sides of the coin. But essentially, the point is that for us in Ghana, we have one of the best structured education systems in Africa. If you look at the way our education system is structured, right from the basic through secondary, technical, vocational, all the way to the tertiary level, there's adequate provision for everyone wishing to pursue their educational goals. Besides, we have the institutional architecture in place as well. In other words, I mean the requisite institutional framework that is required for effective educational delivery. Okay, we have that in place. We also have very qualified and competent human resource to manage the education system. What I find as deficient or a deficiency in the system is that it lacks what I call the practice of institutionalism. There's a distinction between institutions and then institutionalism. So institutions may be in place, but may not be allowed to function. Now, if that is missing, then it will create problems for us. So that is one of the things I find problematic with the system. There are too many distractions. There are too many interferences. There are too many inefficiencies. And many of these are political in nature, let's face it. And they go a long way to affect effective implementation or delivery of the school system. Take, for example, the school feeding program. Okay. If procurement and supply is centralized, how do suppliers from one end of the country get to know the peculiar needs, the circumstances of recipients of those deliveries in another end of the country? So all the way from the south to the north. And so we have had experiences where, for example, there's procurement of expired products supplied to schools. That is one of the reasons. Why did we adopt the system of decentralization and local governance to tackle issues like this? So I think that is where I find problematic with our system. Otherwise, we are comparable to, for example, the Nigerian, the Japanese, and the American systems. Because way back in 1987, we decided to adopt the model they are running. So our secondary school system, for instance, is comparable to what is run in Japan, in the US, in Nigeria.
Yes,
maybe many people are not aware of this, but that's the case.
Yes, let's build gradually to the political interference, and then the reforms that were done in the 1980s. Yeah. But of course, like I said in the introduction, if one goes back from independence and going through all our governments, both democratic and military governments, there have been arguments about where our area of prioritization should lie, as to whether, as a developing country with scarce resources, we should concentrate on building quality education, in which case widening access should not be of prime importance, or whether we should focus our resources on sending as much, sending access as much as possible to every part of the country and compromise on the quality, since we do not have resources to tackle both. Do you think that this is an argument that ought to be had, or you find a room in which these two can coexist with the resources that a developing country like Ghana has?
Yes. To begin with, Albert, what you're saying is true. As a country, we have always tried to do just that. We couple quality with expansion. A number of factors account for this. I'd like to touch on that first before I talk about whether it is the way to go. First of all, if you refer to our national constitution, Article 25(1), makes it mandatory that all persons shall have the right to equal educational opportunities and facilities. All persons, underline that. Besides, the GES has a mandate to ensure that all Ghanaian children of school-going age, regardless of tribe, gender, disability, religious and political affiliations, etc., they are provided with inclusive and equitable quality education. Beyond that, we have had demographic changes take place in our country. There are also labor market dynamics to consider. As a result of these, it has become necessary for successive governments to couple the pursuit of expansion of access with provision of quality or ensuring quality delivery. This is to meet these requirements or the factors I just outlined. Now, if you asked me, is that the way to go? Yes, as a country, we have chosen to be governed by a constitution. That's the supreme law of the land, and that is the provision therein. Beyond that, we have state institutions mandated to do specific things, and their mandates are clearly spelled out. But we are not also a static country. Changes are taking place. What you needed as requirements for employment 5 years ago are completely different from what you need today. You need competencies in very different fields. ICT, AI is now ruling. So all of these are making it imperative that what we deliver, it gets to everyone, but that it meets the requirements. So as a result of this, I will argue that it is very unlikely that a sequential approach may take center stage. Indeed, our problem isn't the concurrent pursuit of quality and expansion of access. As a country, that's not our problem. Our problem for me has got to do with the lack of efficiency and prudence in how we utilize our limited national resources. That is where the problem lies. If we are able to use what we have wisely, prudently, we can make great strides.
Well, yeah, talking about making great strides. From your response to my first question that I posed to you, you talked about the fact that the system that Ghana operates right now is not different from the system that is operated in other parts of the world. And you also alluded to the fact that this followed a reform in the 1980s, where with the assistance of the World Bank and other developmental partners, our system got reformed. And indeed, the conversation at the time was that that system was going to be a practical and it was going to give hands-on training to students so that they come out as well-rounded and holistic human beings ready to face, at the time, They were talking about face the 21st century because we hadn't moved into the century yet.
Yeah.
Now, after close to 30 years or more of the implementation of that particular system, well, we are still tweaking it here and there, but fundamentally, that system hasn't changed completely.
Yeah.
What do you think of that system that we adopted? Do you think that compared to what most people say, some older people say these days, that probably we should have probably stayed back with the old system and not moved into this system, do you think that moving to this new system, well, new in quotes, was the right approach?
Yes, I take it that you are referring to the 1987 reforms,
Exactly.
led by ANFOM,
Exactly.
under the PNDC regime, which immediately preceded our transition into constitutional rule. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, the 1987 reforms they sought to achieve something. There was something fundamentally wrong with our educational system. I'll touch on them briefly. Okay. So the 87 reforms felt there was the need to tackle the structure of the school system. They were structural, we often call them structural deficiencies. The curriculum was not addressing the current needs and future of the young folks that were being trained. And there were limited channels of progression. So very few people had access to secondary school, that is the academic track, and then through to the A-level and then to the university. Very few had access to that. Many terminated at the middle school level. So Form 4, if you were lucky to write a common entrance exam and you passed and you got to secondary school, then you had a possibility of progressing to the university. What the 87 reforms came to do was to break this structural barrier, and thus it popularized access to secondary education. That was what it did. Apart from that, the structure, if you look at the structure of the school system that was run then, I often use this format. So it was a 6-3-2-2 format, pre-university. 6-3-2-2 format means that people had to go through a 6 year of primary school. Then they went to 3 years of middle school, and then some moved into secondary school, lower. So there was lower sec, upper sec, and then if they qualified, they progressed to the O-level, the A-level, and then to the university. What the reforms did was to introduce a 6-3-3 format for pre-university education. That meant 6 years of primary school, 3 years of junior high school, and then 3 years of senior secondary school. We used to call it SSS, senior secondary school. Of course, another challenge we confronted that the reforms focused on was financing, because at the time, our GDP had declined, and the share of our allocation for education, our budgetary allocation to education had declined also from about 6% to 1.6 by 1987. There were too many problems. We didn't have the resources and we had limited room for maneuver. It was imperative to take steps to cut back on public spending on education and direct the limited resources where we needed it most. And so that's why we focused on those areas: the structure, the curriculum, the channels of progression, and of course, the loopholes in the financing. So we did that so that we could correct a number of things. By doing so, we popularized secondary education, and then we introduced the JSS concept. There was also a massive rehabilitation and expansion of basic schools or primary schools, call them. And the new reforms also emphasized on skills training, okay, particularly vocational and technical training. So you would recall those days, there was carpentry and joinery, then there was tailoring and dressmaking, weaving, all of that was happening, yes. You may not have experienced it, but reading the literature, you will come across that. So that was what the emphasis was on. And of course, it involved external donors. The World Bank and the IMF were deeply involved because we needed the financial muscle to be able to do this, and they came in to support. Okay. So, yes, the successes and failures of the 87 reforms. I've already mentioned that they expanded and renovated schools, it popularized education, it vocationalized the pre-uni system as well. At the secondary level that I mentioned earlier. And the BEC and the SSSCE, we used to call it. Now we call it WASI. So BEC is Basic Education Certificate Examination. SSSCE is Senior Secondary School Certificate Examination. Now it is called WASI, West Africa Senior Secondary School Certificate Examination. Okay, so the reforms introduced that as well. But at the uni level, the university level, what it also did was to introduce semesterization. Okay, so the semester model, it was those reforms that brought it about. University students used to go home and return after Christmas, go and write examinations. It stopped that. All those were cost-cutting measures. But faced with limited funding, okay, this affected provision of infrastructure, facilities, and equipment, particularly at the technical and vocational education and training level. There were workshops built in almost all communities with junior secondary schools, and they were furnished with carpentry, and electrical equipment for students for purposes of hands-on learning. But these quickly got deteriorated, abused, stolen, and they were never replaced. So this affected the implementation of the 87 reforms. But on the whole, the 1987 reforms really brought about more pluses for us as a country than the minuses that we encountered.
Wonderful. So yes, so, so as you've laid the foundation, so good structure overall. Implementation had some difficulties, but overall the structure was good. Then this led Ghana to democracy in the Fourth Republic. Then with the introduction of the 1992 Constitution, and then inbuilt in the 1992 Constitution, we had the FQ program, which sought to give all Ghanaian children free universal basic education, and also to make provisions for the progressive, progressive implementation of free education at all the other sectors as much as possible. Up until the year 2016 or 2015, thereabout, education was talked about in politics but it was not a mainstream activity. It came up here and there. But prior to the 2016 elections, then education got thrown into mainstream politics and became a topical matter for a major elections in Ghana.
Yeah.
Now, this is going to usher us into the next leg of our conversation. So take this briefly, we'll go for a break and now come and deal with this matter in detail. But before we go on that break, what do you make of this process of mainstreaming education into partisan politics? Let me not say politics, partisan politics.
Well, the temptation is normally very high to do so, because education is a vehicle for social and economic transformation of a nation, and for that matter, any country or nation. And in the case of democratic dispensations, where electoral politics largely determine who assumes the reins of government and thus a country's national resources, you would notice that the likelihood for exploitation is very high to exploit this vehicle of education, because it is about what goes down to the heart of the people. And so this is what has been happening under our democratic experiment. And I must add that it's not just only post-2016. Maybe the reason is that we have had military interventions in the past. And if you look at policy changes under military regimes, veto power influences are very limited. In other words, the pockets of influences determining which direction we go, they are very limited. They are concentrated in the hands of very few people, the military leadership, or those you call authoritarian leadership. And so you don't get this possibility where there is engagement with a wide array of stakeholders, namely from our lawmakers in parliament, to our assembly members, to our traditional leaders, to civil society organizations, education sector organizations, etc., etc. You don't get that. So probably that may explain why these things were somehow on a low key, that we didn't get to know or hear much about them. For example, if you look at the 87 reforms, that was under a military regime. There were limited opportunities for people to really, challenge some of the things that were happening. If you go back in 1974, when Jobo's committee, those were actually reviews. They reviewed the system after Buzia was overthrown. They reviewed the system and Achampong came in. So if you check that period, there were changes they introduced. For example, the model I mentioned to you earlier, that 6322 format, it was that review in 74 that reversed it, because under Buzia, they actually strengthened it. They tried to limit access. So it was only a privileged few who could have access to secondary education. And that's the route to the university, to obtaining a degree. Okay. So that's possibly one of the reasons why this has been on low key. But if you look at this picture from a general perspective, since educational policy choices are largely determined by politics, and of course, what is politics? Essentially, it is the discussions and maneuverings that often precede decision making. Okay, so politicians, and by this, politicians aligned to political parties, take advantage of this and exploit it. So it's inevitable that politicians will take advantage of this, especially when elections are impending, to make all manner of unrealistic promises. What we need, therefore, I think, is an effective framework for scrutiny of such proposals when they come up. And I think since 2008, we have had such platforms. Civil society, non-governmental organizations have created such platforms. For example, presidential debates, parliamentary, and then you find now the NDC presidential candidate, he actually goes to meet the press, he goes to meet students, and he tells them what he intends to do, and they ask him questions directly. He meets the public, so they are scrutinizing it. Okay? In the past, we didn't have these things happening. Now, these are things that will help us correct the mistakes we made in the past. Okay? If we subject these proposals to public scrutiny before they get implemented, that way we can avoid taking our country down several routes of experimentation, like we did with the 4-year duration of senior high school, for example. You would recall that that was it was just for a period of 2 years, and it was reversed. And that was in 2007, and by 2009, it got reversed. Of course, there are mixed reactions to the successes or failures of that model, but certainly if you find a sizable majority of stakeholders at an education forum, arguing that you don't take a country down a track you have not experimented before. In other words, don't take all of us down a track we have not tried before. So go on an experimental basis. If it works, then we expand. But you don't take all of us down a track, and then the bus crashes, and all of us are in a mess. So that's what I think about this subject.
We'll go. You talked about creating avenues for scrutinizing these before they are implemented.
Yes.
You take a breather. We'll go on a break, and when we come back, you would help us scrutinize some of the things that we've been through in the recent past, and some of the things that we are being promised moving forward. So take a breather. We'll take a short break, and we'll be right back. So if you are just joining us, this is MyView Show here live on Today Ghana News TV, where we are this evening taking a look at the education system in Ghana, and we are looking at it from the good and the bad angles. And our guest for today has been and is Dr. Maxwell Akansina Azieba, who is a senior lecturer at the SD Dombo University of Business and Integrated Development Studies in Ghana, and he's helping us do this analysis. And we are saying a very big thank you to our viewers and listeners on Sakina Information Center in Tatali, on High FM 3.7 at Chima in the Eastern region, and also on the King's Radio and all social media platforms. Thank you for doing the listening. So we'll take some comments from our viewers and our listeners, and then we'll get back to our guest for today. We have a comment from Larry King. Larry King, thank you very much for your message. Fans TV, you say good evening, and you are seated and watching from Aflau. Thank you very much, Fans TV, for doing the watching as always. We are grateful for your attention and for viewing. Frimpong Bafi, you are watching from Akuse near Sumenya. Thank you very much, Frimpong, for doing the watching. Then we have Charles Lavigire, and you are watching from WA on Facebook. Thank you very much, Charles, for doing the watching. Lady Mal _2, you say this is a great topic that needs attention, and you are watching on Twitch live from St. Petersburg in Russia. Thank you very much, Lady Mal, for doing the watching on Twitch. And then we have our next comment coming from Sekapa family, and you say you are watching from Jumapu near Kofri. You are watching on YouTube. Thank you very much, Sekapa TV, for doing the watching on YouTube. Kwesi Insia, you say comparing the education of the West and Ghana is a non-starter, and you're watching from Anglo Town in Kofri. Well, I'm not sure that's what we sought to do, and I think we are on the same line on that. Maybe it's Boateng, you are seeing powerful submission. You are watching from Lisbon in Portugal. Thank you very much, maybe for doing the watching. Frima Oye, you say, please ask him of his opinion on free laptop to SHS students and teachers. You are watching from Buffy. Don't be in a hurry. We'll get there. We'll get there, Frima. Zula, you see, interesting submission. Too much government interference. Education in Ghana should not be left in the hands of politicians. Yes, thank you, Zula. And this is what parents have been crying all along, that politicians should stay off education. Zola, you are back again. You say you are watching in Wa in the Upper West region, I think in Zindel in Wa. Thank you very much, Zola, for doing the watching all the way from Wa. Jaframa TV, you say the topic is deep and heavy. Greetings from Rara in Oti region. Thank you very much, Jaframa TV, for doing the watching and for doing the broadcasting as usual. Kweku Ivo, Kweku, you say good evening. You are watching from Suhum in the Eastern region. Thank you for doing the watching and thank you for doing the watching from Eastern region. NDC Diaspora Union, you say, please, do you see any bright light for Ghana education system vis-a-vis the free SHS? We'll talk about free SHS as well. And you are watching from Amsterdam in Holland. Asempa Heneboachi, you see you are doing the watching and listening from Ashwenhimai in the Eastern region. Thank you very much, Asempa Heneboachi, for doing the listening and the watching. Nash, you see our honorable hall master indeed, all on point. Thank you very much, Nash. Dr. Azieba, I think this is one of your students. Patience Daku, you say good evening. You are watching from Hamburg in Germany. Thank you very much, Patience Daku, for always joining us for the show. Ghana Himfie, you see good show, and you are watching and listening from Bososo in Fantiakwa South District. Thank you very much, Ghana Himfie, for doing the watching. Robert Kimpi, good evening to you, Robert. Long time. You are watching from Paris in France. Thank you very much for doing the watching as usual. Constance, and when sorry, Constance, before I get your name wrong, let me get it right. Constance Akurugu, you say interesting discussion. Thank you very much, Constance, for doing the listening and the watching. Jennifer Azieba, good evening. You are watching from UDS. Thank you very much for joining us for the show today, Jennifer. We are grateful for your time. And we are grateful to all our viewers and listeners for joining us for today's show. And this is MyView Show here live on Today Ghana News TV, where this evening we are discussing the education and politics in Ghana. We are looking at the good and the bad sides of it. So before we went on a break, we went on a journey from education from the Fourth Republic up until the year 2016, and looking at how education got thrown into mainstream politics. Now, we are where we are. I remember this is something that Dr. Papa Kwesi Ndum used to say when he used to contest, that we are where we are, and it's already upon us, and we might as well deal with it. So welcome our guest back online, and then we move forward with where we are right now with education, since it's been thrusted down our necks in a partisan manner. We are compelled to deal with it and to discuss it moving forward. So welcome back, Dr. Azieba. I think you.
Thank you, Albert. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Okay.
Before we went on a break, we talked about the fact that okay, now here we are, post 2016. There was a whole lot of discussions about extending free education beyond the FQ to second cycle institutions, and there were debates as to whether it should be progressive or it should be sudden. And well, it has been implemented. Free SHS, they call it. And now I think moving forward, after 8 years or 7 years of implementation, the major political parties in Ghana seem to have arrived at a common ground that policy is here and is here to stay. Now, without going into the nitty-gritties of it, what is your general assessment of extending education in its free form from the FQ program, the basic school or elementary education, to the second cycle level?
Thank you once again, Albert. So I like to tackle this from this angle. In assessing the free SHS policy. First of all, is it constitutional? In terms of constitutionality, is it breaching any law? I think our constitution makes provision for it. It is the reason why it is being embraced. Of course, specifically the constitution says it should be made progressively free. If we have the resources, we can make it wholly free. But the constitution says it should be made progressively free. So it doesn't breach any constitutional provision. The effectiveness, are the objectives set in the free SHS policy attainable? To begin with, and this is a sad note, there's no publicly available policy on the free SHS implementation program in Ghana. So that is what, for many of us analysts, we still struggle to do. So you have to take bits and pieces of statements, messages from political leaders, office holders, and try to make sense out of it. There's no comprehensive policy that is guiding this. In terms of equity, is it addressing the concern? I think it is addressing the concern of equality. You see, in equity, you give just enough for what one needs to survive. And what is left, you distribute it to those who need it more. In other words, you take just enough to survive and leave the rest for those who really need it. If we look at the cost dimension of the free SHS policy that is being implemented, we have had reports, and the Auditor General's report is replete with this. I mean, needless to go into this, but we have had reports of abuses. The resources are not being prudently utilized. For example, we are aware, is on record, that some suppliers had procured expired food products and supplied to some secondary schools under the program. This is tantamount to causing financial loss, but it's also fraudulent or criminal, if you like. Okay. Yes, the benefits of the free SHS policy, the benefits are enormous. We are opening up education for everyone who is qualified, and this is consistent with our constitutional provisions. So I think we all agree on this. But in terms of political feasibility, in this implementation, is it politically feasible? Yes, it has served a purpose. If you look at the 2020 campaign and the kinds of messages that were used to sway voters, the billboards, it should give you a signal, the weight of the free SHS policy that we started implementing beginning in September of 2017. But beyond this electoral advantage viewpoint, still on the political feasibility is the kind of leadership required to drive the policy forward. I think there are contestations about what the First Minister for Education under the current president's first term in office, Honorable Opoku Prempeh, what he was able to do and what the Honorable Minister who took over from him,
Dr. Edison.
Yes, Dr. Edichum, what Edichum is doing. So if you look at infrastructure, for example, there are many abandoned educational infrastructure projects. To be sure, the e-blocks that were constructed, initiated with public funds, the NDC didn't use party money to construct those facilities. They used taxpayers' monies. Of course, we got funding from the World Bank. So yes, but we are paying back the money. So we are using taxpayers' money to pay back this. So it is our money. You don't let it go wasted. Only recently I saw a block in Ashaiman, and the students were appealing for urgent intervention on a TV3 network show, and that they can't go in there for fear of the building's collapse. So the political leadership, they need to rise above partisanship and do the things that can uplift the collective socioeconomic well-being of our citizens beyond just mere partisan, advantage accruing out of it. That is what is missing. In terms of the administrative feasibility, I think the administrative structure has been in place long before free SHS was implemented, but that was sidestepped. So you would notice that many headmasters in senior high schools, they had been, I don't know the appropriate word to use, but they were all tight-lipped. There were problems eating them up. A few who spoke out, one of them in the Greater Accra region, he was quickly sacked. I think that was a lesson deterrent for the others who chose to stay away. Only Charles, Charles is Conference of Heads of Assisted Secondary Schools. They were the only ones with the guts or the courage to speak. Those in purely public schools, secondary schools, with all the troubles, they kept mute. But if the implementation had actually utilized them, decentralized the implementation to the regions, to the districts, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we are confronted with today. So on the basis of what I've gone through, the criteria I've used to do this quick assessment, I want to say that to a greater extent, the initiative is a positive one, is a plus. The problem has got to do with the implementation, and it is a leadership deficit.
Well, just let's stay on that just for a brief moment. Let me share a rather embarrassing situation. Recently I was doing an academic writing, and then I made reference to the free SHS. Now I got a review to reference it.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that I noticed that there was no document to support it.
Yes, there isn't.
For a policy that has been implemented for over 7 years, there's no policy document that anybody can refer to.
Yeah.
And this leads us to the implementation challenges that you are talking about. Yeah. Because we have had a situation where we have had the creation of parallel structures to run. We have had the creation of free SHS Secretariat when the GES already exists, the ministry already exists, and all the institutional provisions for the implementation of this already existed prior. And we went back to have parallel structures, which now created turf war in the industry, and then the sidelining of other people in order for some people to flourish in that industry, which brought about this issue of what other people call the traffic light system, where some people are going and coming.
Green, gold, red, green, gold, yellow.
So when we lump all of these together, what do you make of the calls that some people are making for the review of this system?
Yes, it's very obvious. It needs, it needs a review. Even the President of the Republic, under whose stewardship this has been rolled out, has now openly admitted that it is imperative to review. Initially, there was lack of political will to admit to the challenges, but the one who is implementing it has agreed that it is necessary to review. I think it's been the political chess game, So one political party proposes to review, another says no, the intention is actually to cancel. And that's to score political points. I think we can always read beyond those. So it's important to acknowledge that the implementation of the free SHS policy has been bedeviled with a number of challenges, and it's important to correct these, okay? So I see the calls as legitimate because there are too many lapses. We need a means testing system, a proper means testing system, okay? So that we can actually identify and target those who genuinely can't afford secondary education and therefore should be supported. What's the point in compelling me, who is capable of paying for the education of my ward, my daughter or my son in secondary school, to abandon my responsibility so that the state takes over? And in doing so, the state jettisons its responsibility midway. I have a younger cousin in one of the secondary schools in Central Region. And we spend more than, how much it costs to keep the young man at school ordinarily if he was not on any free SHS program. You have to go and, they travel alone to travel, and then you have to go and leave supplies with maybe a teacher so that he can visit there. There are times they don't just get the food to eat. They need to eat and learn. They don't have it. So you have to leave food with a teacher, and then he goes there daily from time to time to eat. There are stark realities that people are going through. But if you left this through a system where we evaluate carefully, we do an assessment, okay? So who qualifies? Who actually needs the help? Given your background, your socioeconomic conditions, okay, you qualify. So you are rolled onto the program. And then we absorb your cost. And those who can afford to pay, and there are many who are willing to do that. What is the point in abdicating your responsibility for the state to finance the education of your child from basic through secondary and maybe partly in the uni, and when the child completes, what responsibility do they owe you? They'll ask you one day, did you pay my fees? People fail to think about that.
Anyway, so moving on. You've talked about a lot of things in this submission. You've talked about means testing.
Yeah.
You talked about the the challenges that have been confronted with the implementation, and how it's probably leading to more costs being shifted to parents as opposed to the previous era. Now, that is for one policy that has been implemented. Moving forward, I told you that we are in election year and the politicians are at it again. Now, the major party in opposition, the NDC, is proposing to extend this. Well, not when I say this, not extend it wholesale, but to extend some portion of it as in absorbing the, if you like, academic user fees of first-year students who enter university. You know, and the intent is to roll it out, you know, to in general as the free SHS was rolled out. Now, I like what you know, Africa Education Watch, the director, what's his name, Edu
Asari.
Yeah, he says that politicians can do anything apart from turning a man into a woman. And so, one thing that a lot of people have been saying is that the NDC, or that Ghanaians had a problem with the mass rollout of the free SHS, and it brought about intended inadvertent consequences. So what is the reasoning behind also rolling out another policy when there are avenues for means testing and giving it out to those who need it? What do you make of this assertion?
Yes. To begin with, the idea or the proposal is a great one. Because I work in the university environment, I come across these almost on a daily basis. Many first-year university students struggle to pay admission, academic, and residential facility user fees. Besides, close to about 40,000, qualified graduates fail to gain admission due to financial constraints. So, a fee stress program is responsible for this, and therefore a no fee stress program will alleviate their plight, at least for the short while. But it is important to emphasize that the implementation should not be wholesale. Again, just like I made a point in the case of the free SHS implementation, it is not everybody who is incapable of paying for their university education. I believe in equity, not equality. I already emphasized this point earlier. Support those who can't afford and create opportunity for those who can to pay for their education. In other words, we need to explore the feasibility of the principle of public support for private responsibility in this proposed intervention. So if I were contracted to advise on the way forward, I would tell the proposers of this idea that much as it is a very great welcoming idea, don't go on a wholesale implementation. In fact, even if you come to a university, you would notice there is differential structuring of the fee system, depending on the program you are enrolling to pursue. So maybe the details need to come out before we can actually do a critical evaluation of this policy, because if a student enrolls to read a program in medicine, for example, they don't pay the same fees as a student enrolling to read, say, planning or construction studies or project planning and community development. No, there are differentials, there are variations in the charges. So it is important to know exactly what the targeting is. In other words, the cost component to be covered, so that we can do a careful evaluation of this. But for now, given what I've heard and read about it, I think the way to go is to adopt the means testing approach. No wholesale implementation. In fact, the lessons of free SHS are there for everyone. So I'll be surprised if a new government comes into office and decides to tread on the same line. I'll be surprised. I'll be very, very surprised.
Well,
Yes.
don't be surprised. Politicians can do anything, like I said. I mean, just as my own submission to this. See, what we know is that as for resources, we can always find resources to do anything.
Yeah.
However, the question that is being asked, I think there is a wrong question that is being answered. People talk about the implementation. It's not about the cost of implementing it. It's about
Yeah.
it's about what other sectors of the education sector can lose out as a result of the implementation of this. And free SHS has taught us this, that we can choose to channel the resources from one sector to another, and other parts of the education sector would suffer as a result of this. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. Anyway, now let's go to our final, the final bit of
just a quick one.
Yes,
just a quick one on that. Precisely because of what you've said. So, for fear that other sectors may suffer, a means testing approach, in other words, selective implementation, will save resources that can go to other sectors. If we go on a full-scale implementation, in other words, a wholesale, and we go paying for people who can afford to pay, they are going to keep what they could have probably used to pay as pocket money, and we'll lose out. Yes, so that's what I wanted to add.
Good, perfect. So this we've kept you beyond. Normally it's a 1 hour show. Yeah. But yeah, as you know, education is also something that's it's an area that's dear to my heart. So we've gone beyond our time. But last question for you. One of the policies that's been ruled out is they call it free. Is it one device per child? Well, another policy that I have to see a policy document on. What do you make of? Let's make this brief. What do you make of the implementation of this? Is this the policy that eventually gets Ghana to catch up with the rest of the world in this era of digitalization and AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning sector? Or this is just another misplaced priority aimed at procurement, which would turn into another wild goose chase of dissipating state resources that could have been used in tackling basic problems. What's your take on that?
Yes, I think you are referring to the one tablet, one student policy for second cycle institutions.
Exactly.
Okay. To be sure, the free tablet distribution is part of the ICT in education reforms under the Ghana education reform agenda. So in Ghana, we've had 4 main educational reforms. So 1951 under Nkrumah, then we had the 87 under Jerry Rawlings, that's the ANFORM. Then we had the 2002 under President Kufuor, that was led by Anna Moamensa Jofus, the former Vice Chancellor of University of Education, Winneba. And then the current one is actually anchored on the Education Strategic Plan of 2018 to 2030, which the government of Ghana developed. And so the Ghana Education Reform Agenda is anchored on that, but also SDG 4. That is the basis for which they are proceeding. So the truth is that what they are doing is part of the ICT in education reforms. It is part of it. And the idea is to develop early desire and competencies in children so that they can use ICT, to equip pre-tertiary learners with ICT skills and then infuse, ICTs into education management, and thereby transforming teacher development and tertiary education through technology-based training. That is the idea, which is very good. But then the question that arises is that what should be of priority now, considering the myriad of challenges confronting the educational sector? For example, we are confronted still with schools under trees. As at 2023, a consortium of civil society organizations, including Comfort, Star Ghana, and Action Aid, released a report that's indicated that out of 5,400 schools under trees, only 17 of them have been completed since 2021. Did you get that? Out of 5,400, only 17 have been completed. So if we still have kids under trees learning, and we have students who are sleeping in uncompleted dormitories, and you are providing tablets to students who are in schools where there is no electricity or its supply is not regular. There was this initial intervention of providing internet connectivity to secondary schools that fizzled out because the infrastructure is lacking. You see, you need to have stable power to be able to maximize the benefits arising out of this. So I agree with you. It is maybe a strategy for reaping the benefits of procureurship, procurement, malpractice, corruption, procureurship. That is the agenda, I think. Otherwise, I don't understand why you should be distributing, tablets now when there are more pressing problems to deal with. The president had talked about it, the Ghana Smart Schools program. That is it. That's what they are doing. It's part of the strategic plan, but I think the priority is wrong.
So, as part of this strategic plan, I have posed some questions. Maybe you can, maybe you have some answers to them if you have seen the implementation document.
Okay.
What we are told is that the idea is to transition children from the hardcore textbooks to tablets, where they have their reading, their learning materials on the tablets. Now, under this system, where you have a one-off distribution, who bears the cost if a tablet breaks down or is stolen? The student or the state? And yes.
Unfortunately, I have no answer to that question. I do not know what mechanism or measure is in place to ensure that when there are breakages or thefts reported, then this is the procedure to follow to replace it. But I can imagine that they are not going to replace them anyway, because I do not think the state will replace that. Beyond that, this idea to eventually replace hardcore exercise books and textbooks with tablets. I just raised the point about access to power and data. Of course, the argument could be made that you need a one-off installation of the program and then you can access it. That's fine, but you need electricity to run this.
Yes, and these are the concerns that I have, because then if the parent or the student bears the cost for repairs and something, you are just increasing the cost of education to the child. Now, we have situation in Ghana where schools are being closed down for non-payment of electricity bills, and you are providing them with tablets, increasing the cost of education. Now, in this current system where we have textbooks, if somebody steals one subject textbook, or if somebody loses one subject textbook, at least they have other books they can study. But if somebody loses one tablet, all the reading materials, the study materials of the student is gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
What are the provisions in place for this? Internet access, you talked about. So for me, there are so many questions that need answers. The teachers who have paid for their tablets haven't even got them yet. So there are lots of questions that need to be answered under this policy. But like I said, until we are given documents to examine, we can only ask questions and have no answers. Yes. But thank you very much, Dr. Aziema, for joining me today. Left to me alone, we can have this discussion like forever, because there are several areas that I want us to touch on, but time would not allow us to do that. But we are grateful to you for making time to join us this evening and for sharing with us your knowledge and experience on education and politics in Ghana. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Albert, and thanks to your team, your viewers and listeners. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you very much, and then we would stay in touch. So thank you very much to all our listeners who joined us today, this evening for the show. We would like to say a very big thank you to our listeners on Sakina FM, Sakina Information Center in Teteli, sorry. Also, a very big thank you to our listeners on IFM 93.7 in Achimai in this region. We would like to say a very big thank you to our listeners on the King's Radio in Accra. Also, a very big thank you to all our viewers and listeners on all our social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Twitch, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and all available social media platforms. We are grateful for your time. We are grateful for joining us this evening. And we hope that we have been able to give you very useful information that can inform you moving forward. We have Juliet Azieba. She says she's watching from US. Thank you very much, Juliet, for doing the watching. We are grateful for your time. And so, until we come your way again, same time next week with another exciting discussion for our deliberation, we say stay blessed, stay safe. God bless you. God bless Ghana. Good evening.